So the Bishop Berkeley, talking through his spokesperson Philanus, argues that, look, if you can take anything you might encounter out in the world, like this tulip, for example, you can analyze it like this. You can say, okay, so what is there to this tulip? Well, there's its color, but of course that color, that's not a property of the tulip itself. That's a property of your perception of the tulip. Okay, well, there's the tulip shape. Well, the shape isn't a property of the tulip itself. The shape is a property of your own perception. There's its size. Same thing, property of your own perception. Solidity, property of your own perception. Says, okay, so is there anything else to this tulip other than its shape and its size and its color and its texture? No, there's nothing there except all those things, but all those things are just properties of your own perception. So what is that tulip? That tulip is just one of your perceptions. It is an idea. So this tulip and anything else you might encounter is just a bundle of properties, and all those properties are just properties of your own perceptions, your own ideas. So everything in the world is made out of ideas. That's Berkeley's idealism. So whereas Descartes just had this metaphysics that said, there's two kinds of things in the world. There's ideas, and then there's the physical objects that cause you to have those ideas. Berkeley comes along and says, no, we don't have to worry about this mind and matter idea and physical object interaction problem that Princess Elizabeth was worried about, because the only thing that exists are ideas. That tulip's an idea, a chair is an idea, an elephant is an idea, everything is an idea. So we've moved away from this picture that we had from Descartes and that Locke seems to have, that we have things out in the world, physical objects, like actual physical horses, like the one down on the right here, and a world in which those physical things then cause us to have ideas. And sometimes those ideas fail to correspond to what's actually out there. So you might see a horse out on a dark night and you might have a false idea. You might think that it's a cow, even though it's actually a horse. So there can be this mismatch between your ideas and the actual physical objects that are out there. And Descartes tries to explain this phenomena by saying, see, there's two fundamentally different kinds of stuff. There's stuff that's made out of physical matter that has shape and size and length and width, those horses out there. And then there's the stuff, my ideas, that don't have any of those properties. Well, now Berkeley is coming along and saying, look, it ain't like that. Instead, what's going on here is everything is an idea. All the things that you encounter day to day, those are just ideas of some kind. Now, you might start getting worried. You might say, okay, yeah, but what happens if, like, this tree that I'm looking at or hearing or smelling or perceiving in some way, what if I go far, far away and I don't perceive that tree at all? Well, if that tree just is my perceptions, it seems like that tree would just blink out of existence. And yet it seems as though there are indeed trees out in the wilderness of Siberia, for example, that no one is perceiving right now, and yet we tend to assume that they still are there, they exist there, even though no one's perceiving it. And yet Berkeley's come along and said, look, to exist is to be perceived. The only things that exist are perceptions, are ideas. And so you get this worry that, if there's a tree out in the forest and no one's around to perceive it, it doesn't exist at all, because all it is a bundle of perceptions. And this, of course, seems to be kind of a problem for dualism, because we think that sometimes things do continue to exist, even though no one is perceiving them. The planet Uranus exists out there in space, even though it wasn't until very, very recently that anyone had any kind of perception of the planet Uranus. So that's a problem that Berkeley has to solve. And here's how he goes around solving it, summed up in this little poem to him. So we get the problem here where there's this young man who said, God must think it's exceedingly odd if he finds that this tree continues to be when there's no one about in the quad. So if there's some tree out there in the quad on campus and no one is perceiving it, no one's looking at it, well, according to Berkeley, say, well, the tree just doesn't exist because no one is perceiving it. And that tree just is a perception. So that's kind of odd. It's exceedingly odd. So here's the reply to this problem. Well, dear sir, your astonishment's odd. I am always about in the quad. And that's why the tree will continue to be, since observed by yours faithfully, God. So there's Berkeley's idea that even when you and I and other humans are not perceiving that tree in the quad or that tree out in the wilderness of Siberia or Uranus or some far-off galaxy, God, however, is observing everything at every time. And so that tree in the quad continues to exist as a perception in the mind of God. So for Berkeley, it goes a little further than saying everything is idea. He says even further, actually, everything is an idea in the mind of God. So that's how that tree can continue to be when you and I aren't perceiving it, because it's still being perceived in the mind of God. Now, at that point, you might start thinking, right, but then what makes this whole idea different than the dualist idea that there are two kinds of stuff in the world, perceptions and physical objects? It seems like you might want to just say, oh, well, there's these human ideas that you and I have, and we can contrast those with these things that we had been calling physical objects that have these properties that are independent of our own individual perceptions. And Berkeley's just kind of calling physical stuff ideas in the mind of God, even though there seem to be very different kinds of things than the ideas that you and I have. So, you might not find Berkeley's idealism all that plausible. Not terribly many people do these days. And so now we've got two metaphysical theories out on the table. We've got dualism, where we've got physical stuff and mental stuff, but then we've got that problem that Princess Elizabeth raises. Well, how the heck does that stuff interact? Then we have a flavor of monism that says there's just one thing in the world, it's just all ideas. But, then you might worry about how plausible that is. So now we're going to be once again shopping around for another metaphysical theory to make sense of how our ideas and our perceptions relate to the world. And that's what we'll take a look at next week.